Welcome to today's episode on an intro to kubectl, or cubectl, or kubectl, or that Kubernetes command line thing. All of them will do. Let's get nullified.
3, 2, 1, 0.
The null channel.
All right, so today's episode is all about an introduction to kubectl. It is the command line interface that most people use to interact with the Kubernetes control plane. Now, I did this video because I actually created another video about my 5 most underused or underrated kubectl commands, what they did, and why you should start using them more. And then I thought, but I haven't really done an introduction. So before you see this video, which I'll gladly hold on to until next week, I'm going to make this video for all of you who might not be that familiar with kubectl or kubecontrol, or whatever you want to call it. So kubecontrol, like I said, is a command line tool to interact with the control plane of Kubernetes. It's pretty much that simple. But it's a little bit more than that, but really not a whole lot. The biggest thing that it handles for you is authentication and easy REST calls. So it's really the control plane, the API server is a REST API server. And as you can see here, we can actually make all of these calls that you would make in kubectl as REST queries with either wget or curl or whatever you would like. If you notice in this command, there's a couple key differences, and that's all about passing. You either need a bearer token or you need to pass certificates and CAs to authenticate with. Kubectl handles this for you through a file called the Cubeconfig file. The important aspect of this is that if you wanted to make an application that did a lot of the things that kubectl does, or you want to automate them, you can do it without ever using kubectl's library. And that's kind of really important because you don't want to use kubectl's library because you can't really import it because it's in Kubernetes proper, and you should never import Kubernetes proper code. It's not ever designed to be used as a module in somebody else's code. So don't do it because it causes a lot of pain because people do it. All right. So it is just really a wrapper for the REST API. So the big thing to take away here is it's really important to learn the REST API from the command line and explore it. As you can see, you can explore the REST API, and see and explore the objects that are given there. But the REST API is slow and cumbersome to use. You have to type out long paths, whereas the kubectl obfuscates this in these really nice and easy verbs. And the other nice thing is it handles authentication for you, so you don't have to pass all these flags to curl. So let's get into kubectl and how you can use it and the important parts of kubectl. So kubectl is very commonly aliased to K because you type it so much. If you're ever doing Kubernetes stuff, you are going to type kubectl a bunch of times. I cannot stress this. You will type kubectl a bunch of times. So one of the very first things that people will do is to alias kubectl. So to do that, it's a Linux construct. All you have to do is type and this is going to alias your Kubernetes or kubectl. And now, if we did kubectl-h, you can see that there is a list of 42 different commands or subcommands for kubectl. But we can also do k-h, and aliasing has allowed this to work. You'll notice another thing, and this is another reason I really like Zhush, and I really like this theme for Zhush. As soon as I type K, it's actually going to tell me my context. And this is important to remember your context, because what you'll find as a Kubernetes admin is that you're probably going to have to deal with more than one cluster, usually lots. And there's other tools out there to help you, but they're all built off of the base of this context. And so this is really helpful. When I am doing a Kubernetes command, if I'm like, oh, what cluster is this? Oh, well, this is my kind cluster. And I can see that right there. So very helpful. I highly recommend. We'll touch a little bit more on contexts in just a little bit. Let's move on right now with this. All right, so we have all of these commands. They can be a little bit daunting, from everything from create, expose, run, and set to explain, get, edit, and delete. What are the very first ones you should learn? Well, the very first command you should know is get. Get is the way to send an HTTP REST command. So here is kubectl get nodes, which is still the same as kubectl get nodes. As you can see, these are the exact same thing. That's all aliasing did. And when you do this, it is the exact same as running this REST command. Now, as I have shown you, you can go ahead and get all of the certs and the CAs and pass these to curl, but there's actually a simpler way to explore the REST API, and that's the next command that I'm going to teach you. So it's really easy. All you have to do is kubectl proxy. Now, all a proxy is something that sits in between and proxies your request. So this is the same as an English, the standard English word proxy when you have a proxy that goes between you and somebody else. This proxy is proxying your credentials. So you know how I had said one of the main things that kubectl does, besides give you a nice command line interface to a REST API, is handles your credentials. So what this proxy is going to do, since it already has your credentials, and we'll see that in a second, it's going to proxy your requests to the web server. So you can do proxy, let's do port equals 8, let's do 8080. Now, the other thing that you can do here is the ampersand right there. And what this is going to do is launch it in the background so we can continue using this shell. Now you need to remember to go ahead and close that. So if you don't want to have to worry about closing that, which is probably the safer thing to do, is go ahead and run it like this. It won't start in the background, but you will have to start a new shell terminal to use it. So now we've proxied on port 8080. So now we can hit the Kubernetes API without sending all of the cert data, because it's already in our kubectl and it's just going to proxy that. So instead of hitting the IP address for our server, wherever it is, we can go ahead and run something like curl and now we put it on port 8080 of localhost and then API. Here you go. This is the response. It gave us a response and it gave us which version of the API it's running and the client CIDR. Now we can do more. Like I said, we did originally, we did not alias it over here. So if you want your alias to stick around, so you want to be able to use K all over the place all the time, you're going to have to go into your profile or your Zhush file, whichever one you're using, or your bash RC. And you're going to want to add the alias down here. So you can do something like and now we can use K again. And now I will be able to use K every single time I open up my terminal. Now we did k get pods and we have that there's no resources. Let's do nodes because that actually returns nodes. Now we'd like to do this, but with actually calling the API, right? We now have this curl command here. And if we wanted to get the nodes like we did here, we can hit the API. Now, if we just hit this right here, it's going to tell us that there is one version, v1. So let's go ahead and hit the v1 here and hit return again. And in here, you're going to see it return basically the things it's capable of. So we have names, services. So services, we have service accounts, we have secrets. So these are the things under this. And you could search through this. I prefer to use grep. So let's use grep. And so now, we were looking for node. So we have nodes. So let's use that. So let's just do nodes. Now, I said this was going to return the same thing. It doesn't quite. Watch this. This is a lot of information. If you remember, this was very human readable. It's JSON. It's not too bad, but it has a lot of information. And sure, it's the control plane, the kind control plane. So this is the same object. We can see that here very easily, but it's not quite as readable. This does print out by default, very human readable. But if you wanted to get the same information, you can do that. You type O for output and JSON. And here we get the same object. So it is still returning the same object. Just by default, it gives you a very human readable object. So that's all it's doing. If you see that you're getting different things, and honestly, there's more information than that just what's given here. A very, very simple and super useful thing that you can do on most things. Instead of just saying get nodes, see how much information you get there, do -o wide. Wide is going to give you a lot more information still in the human readable format. So if you had a bunch of nodes here, it would list a bunch of nodes, all in a very, very easy to read format. So now we can see what OS image the node is, what the internal IP address, what the version is, and how old it is. All right, so now we're getting the hang of things. If you want some more information on something, you can pass the O wide. We now see that there's really this one-to-one. We get kget nodes is really this curl API v1 nodes, and this is making a GET request. This is super cool. And we saw how we can explore this API, because if you look here, API isn't the only path here. There are many things. This is a huge API. We were just looking at this right here. There's a whole lot more here, and there's a bunch of stuff inside v1. So I think it's really important to explore this API and get to be familiar with it. So just understand that kubecontrol is powered by this API, and that's pretty much all it's doing. You also saw that we could call the API by proxying the request. That proxy is handling our authorization. So you want to do it without kubectl? We can do that if you guys would like. We don't have to have kubectl proxy our request. So if we go over here and stop this proxy, we stopped it. This is going to fail now because our computer is not serving anything there, and the proxy isn't there to add the authorization headers and pass it on to the Kubernetes server. And if we pointed it at our Kubernetes server, we would still fail authorization because we haven't sent any authorization headers, and we can't just give some authorization headers because we don't have the certificates. So now we can use kubectl. You can actually do it without kubectl because you can actually take apart your file and whatnot, but it's actually pretty easy to do with kubectl. So the only thing that you really have to do is this right here, kubectl get secrets -o. Now you have to do -o because if you do get secrets and you look at this right here, it actually won't give you the secret data by default. By default, it obfuscates it. Now, secret data is just base 64 encoded. Don't think it's encrypted. Base 64 encoding is not encrypted. Encoding is easy to unencode. It's not encryption. It's just like zipping a file. You would never zip a file and think that it was safe. Encoding, especially base 64 encoding, does not protect your file. All it does is make it so that you can't read it over somebody's shoulder. That's the only way it makes it any more safe. It's not hard to decode. Anyways, so because of that, they just don't show it by default. So when you're going to get secrets, you're going to go here and you're going to do, we want to get secrets -o. We're going to use a JSON path to select the object that we want. I'll do a whole video on JSON path, but just understand that JSON path is a way to dynamically select elements out of JSON. And I'll do a whole video on it. It's actually something I could get better at. There's always stuff to learn. Never think that as soon as you think that you've learned everything, I'm looking at you college students that are just graduating, you'll learn that there's more to learn. And if you don't learn that there's more to learn, you've kind of hit the end of your growth. You're never going to grow more. So stay humble and continue learning. The stuff that I'm showing you here is just a place to start to learn. It's not the end. It's not everything you need to know about kubectl. It's just to get you kickstarted on learning kubectl. All right. So we're going to do a JSON path and we're going to do items. Now I can explain this in another video or else this video would be very long. That is actually not. So it expanded, but it did not expand through the pipe. That is not what I meant for it to do. Oh, you know what, guys? You know what? I screwed up. That is a $sign. $sign. Whoever said ampersand was crazy. All right, so this will expand it. Thank you. All right, so what I did wrong here. All right, so after looking at this for like way too long, what I did wrong here is I have an ampersand, not a $sign. So we just got to throw in a $sign. We're going to be running to this, and you'll notice it's HTTPS, and we're going to ask for the API. V1 nodes, just like we had. And then we're going to say header. So we're going to say header authorization bearer. And then we're just going to throw in a token here. And so we set this token to an environment variable, so that will expand there because it's in the quotes, and type in insecure because we haven't, it's not, the certificate isn't actually verified. I have talked about a kubeconfig file. The kubeconfig file is what's powering how you're authenticated and to what clusters. So let's open it up. By default, kubecontrol is going to put it in a .cube/config file. So I'm at my home directory. This is my home directory, and we can go ahead and ls.cube, and you'll see that there's a couple things in here, but this is the file that we're really concerned about. And we want to go ahead and open that up in whatever of editor you're most comfortable with, cubeconfig. And here you're gonna see several clusters. So sorry, I'm blurring some of these because some of these are real clusters. And this one is actually the one, as you can see, its name is kind. It's the one that I'm running just for this, so you can see what the certificate authority data would look like. And it's I'll get a new one as soon as I shut this computer down and reboot it, because I'll stand up a new cluster. So, and you can see that the server address is here and the name is kind. Now, this isn't all the information here. Not only do you have clusters, so you can see I have 2 clusters in this config, I also have contexts, and these contexts are which clusters have which users and which user names. So you can see here the kind has a username of kind and has a user of kind and has a cluster of kind. Whereas my real Kubernetes cluster, this context has a Kubernetes admin at Kubernetes admin as the user, and cluster of Kubernetes. And you can see which is the current context, which is which cluster am I currently talking to. So the current context is kind. So that's this cluster right here, this context, which is named kind. The user is kind, and the cluster is kind. So if we want to see which cluster it is, it's this cluster located here with this certificate authority. If we want to see the user, we can look for the users. So here we have users, and here is the user Kubernetes admin. You guys can't see this data because it is important to me. But this data here you can see, and this is the name kind, and here is the client certificate data. And here is the client key data. And this is how it is authorizing you to access the API. And that's all. When we were getting the token, we were asking kubeconfig and kubectl for this information, specifically from the secrets. But you could also put this, you'd have to unbase64 encode it. This and this, you could put it into a file as certificate data and also pass that to your Kubernetes cluster and access it through the API that way. So this is all this does. And this actually helps us with our next step. Let's say we want to access this other cluster we have here. How would we do that? Let's jump into that right now. So we can go to the command config, and let's look at that. Config allows you to interactively update, change, and configure your config. We're going to focus on really simple cases here, and we're going to tell it to change the context. But you know what? I can't remember what my contexts were because I have like 100 Kubernetes clusters. So let's check which ones are in this config file. We can do kubectl. Let's just write it out. Kubectl config get contexts. And we can see that we have 2. This is the one that is current, kind, and this is the other one, Kubernetes admin at Kubernetes. And this is the cluster and the auth information. All right, so we want to switch to this one. Let's do it. All we have to do is kconfig use context. Now we have switched to the Kubernetes admin, and as we can tell, we can do kget nodes, and we can see this cluster has been around for 60 or almost 60 days. So we're obviously on a different cluster. And if we do kubectl config get contexts again, you can see that the current one is indeed this one. And so we've just switched between two clusters. It gets even better than that, because you know how a lot of the time you really shouldn't work in the default namespace. But this is all running in the default namespace. So if you wanted to do it in a different namespace, so let's do kget namespaces, and we can see all of the different namespaces running on this. And we want it to do it in some other namespace than the default one. The best way to do it, or one way to do it, is instead of running it like this, we can pass in, or you can do namespace if you want to type it all out, in Istio system. And this would create it in the Istio system. We don't actually want to do that, but a lot of the times you are running in a namespace and not just any random default namespace. It's not really best practice. You can actually use to set which namespace you want to be using. So you can use set context and tell it the namespace you want to be running in. So here we can say, let's do get namespaces, and we want to be in Studio Light's namespace. So we can do config set context namespace equals Studio Lights. We want current, sorry. So current. Now, if we do kget pods, oh, we see that this is the only pod running in there because our default namespace isn't the default namespace. If we wanted to get the same thing that we got the first time, we would have to do in default. That was the namespace where our deployment of a very stupid pod is not running. This is a lot of information, but I wanted to go over the things I wish I had known when I was first getting started with kubectl. Some things that make me faster and some things I know. If this is interesting you and you're ready for a little bit more of a deep dive, not a real deep dive, but a little bit of a deep dive, join me in my next video that I'll be releasing whenever I like because it's already done. And we'll explore kubectl and some of the underutilized, what I think are underutilized, at least I underutilized them for the longest of times before I realized the power that they had and how they could help me. One, I only learned a little bit ago, and I've used kubectl for like a year and a half. So join me for that video, and we will go kind of a little bit more in depth into kubectl. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you did not, go ahead, hit the subscribe button, stick around, and see if these videos get any better for science.